And something that potentially could disrupt the supply chain is any conflict between China and Taiwan. And I just would like to get your thoughts on it, maybe more of an unbiased perspective on what the situation actually is there and what you think might happen down the line.
Well, we should say we are, as conservative as many listeners might believe we would be with our politics, we are decidedly anti-war and pro-peace. And last I checked, two nuclear superpowers were already entangled in a proxy war, on Europe's doorstep. I'm not sure why we would want to have two such wars ongoing at the same time. And now, of course, it's a complicated issue, and we don't really write about China-Taiwan from any historical or geopolitical perspective. But you're absolutely correct in that if a conflict opened up between China and Taiwan, that would be a catastrophe that would ripple around the world, which is all the more motivation for trying to reach a diplomatic solution that avoids kinetic conflict. Look, Taiwan is the home of some of the most important factories in the world, which is their entire chip, semiconductor chip infrastructure. And something were to happen to those point sources of risk in our global economy, it would be a true catastrophe for sure. And the art of making semiconductors is indeed an art. It's not something that can just be copied and pasted. The technologists who work at such factories are amongst the most important humans on the planet, given the susceptibility of our way of living to such tiny pieces of technology. And this is only, of course, getting accelerated with the build-out of AI and the excitement therein. And so beyond just Australia, of course, a war with Taiwan, a true kinetic conflict that involved the US and China would be a catastrophe of unthinkable proportions that we would be foolish to not do our level best to avoid. And I don't think that's a very controversial opinion.
No, of course. I thought you also wrote a piece about how China have monopolized supply chain points across the world, something that many people may have heard inklings of, but it'd be nice to know in a bit more depth of how they've done that.
Sure. We wrote a piece on this, as you correctly said, called Build Your Dreams, where we talked about the same pattern that we've seen over and over in our careers directly playing out in the electric vehicle space. So, today, for example, the solar industry is dominated by China, right? They have monopoly control over key elements of the earliest parts of the polysilicon supply chain. I was in the industry when they did that. And it's the exact same tools and techniques that they're using today for batteries and electric vehicles, which is they leverage local access to cheap thermal coal and what we would consider slave labor, and they give massive policy support to their state-owned enterprises and other domestic champions. And then they flood the world with artificially cheap supply and put everybody else out of business. And this is how it came to be, for example, that China controls more than 95% of polysilicon ignite production and wafering, which basically means if you have a polysilicon factory in the US, that material gets shipped to China for further processing, which becomes a choke point over which they can monopolize control. And they're doing the same in batteries and electric vehicles as well. And we do think that we, by pointing this out, at least we can make people aware that this is what's coming. And of course, since we published that piece, we've seen the European Union begin to talk about imposing tariffs on this wave of electric vehicles that looks slated to come from Chinese factories into Europe, which would put significant competitive pressure on the Volkswagens and of the world and other European automakers, BMW and Mercedes. And so, we do think that this is going to explode into the papers here pretty soon.
So you believe that is their strategy, essentially, is to purposely flood the market with cheap EVs so that they gain market share and put the other companies out of business? Or at least
that's what they did in solar, and it's what they're doing in batteries, So look, to gain a foothold, China does the dirty work the West finds unpalatable. So in this case, basic mining, processing, and other ecologically damaging steps. Like, there's no NIMBYism in China, right? And then once it's got that foothold, like, for example, basically all the rare earth elements in the world are processed in China, regardless of where they're mined. And there's some efforts in the US recognizing this as a critical vulnerability to change that, but that's the reason why rare earths are processed in China is because it's an incredibly dirty exercise. And we in the West don't want it. Green lawns over here and fresh water over here is fine. But then, the magnets in the heart of your wind turbine or at the heart of your electric motor got to come from somewhere. And today they come from China.
Yeah.
Because China is willing to do that dirty work. And so this is, of course, one thing if it was an isolated event, but we see it over and over and over across all industries that they decide are strategic. Like we can read what they say and predict it, like they declared 5-6 years ago that they wanted to dominate electric vehicles, and look what's happened. BYD is about to pass Tesla in global sales of battery electric vehicles. It already dominates Tesla in total new energy vehicles, as they would call it, which is the sum of their plug-in hybrids and full BEVs. Just to give you a benchmark, I think Tesla just reported 435,000 deliveries, and BYD was over 700,000 of those two categories, and 430,000 full BEVs. So next quarter, they're going to be the global champion of electric vehicles, and they're just getting started. This is early days. And by the way, it should be said, they are more than willing to steal all intellectual property from those who developed it in the West with reckless abandon. They do this all the time. And what happens is, of course, Western manufacturers have to demonstrate growth to Wall Street, and so they don't protest. If they protest too much, they get kicked out of the market. So all of these automakers who wanted to participate in the Chinese growth market were forced to form JVs with state-owned enterprises where their technology was just swept into the Chinese machine. And anybody who denies that is naive. And then the domestic producers can mix and match the very best technologies from several foreign companies, which adds a powerful synergistic force to the advantage of skipping decades of investment that would otherwise be needed to achieve such expertise from a standing start. And so this is how they do it. To deny it is to be blind to the realities, and we've seen it, and they did it in solar. How is it that they came to dominate 95+% of all of the processing of polysilicon in the world that matters? It's because they do the dirty work, and we let them.